from bosons to beatitudes. Everything in the Urantia book is beautifully balanced. What do we do to increase plausibility? How do we make the skeptical scientist more likely to read the Urantia book? And basically, I've broken this examination into two parts. One is just an updating of the science that got me into the Urantia book back in 1985. So let me just read before I go off on a tangent here. So, to increase the scientific plausibility or acceptability of the Urantia book, part one of this paper revisits and updates the specific set, a very specific set of 31 scientific assertions or predictions made in the Urantia book prior to 1934. And then we look at the changes or plausibility of those considering scientific knowledge of the time. And we compare those results to evaluations that were done when we wrote the paper in 1987, back in Amsterdam in 2017, and again in the present. And basically, we're looking for how are those things changing over time. The Urantia book, which was introduced to me by this brilliant physicist, Dr. Erwin Ginsberg, um, he had 45 patents, and I've only got 33, so he's definitely my mentor. Um, he presented cosmology and science to me, which, although is unorthodox, it seemed to be plausible. Both the science and theology seemed wrong to me in varying degrees. Um, uh, but typically, the way scientists look at things is they look to improve the model. They look to see what would make it better, what would make the science better, or the theology better. So, trying to apply this progressive thinking to the Urantia book theology was kind of a goal. And part one just looks at the logic of convergence. How are the sciences converging over time? Let me just introduce you briefly to me in case you don't know me. At age 40, I was going through a midlife crisis, running a research division of a turbine engine overhaul company, and we put out an ad for Creative Genius. This Erwin Ginsberg, who had written the book First Man Then Adam, applied for the job, and he was a creative genius. He and I wrote this paper looking at 31 scientific predictions of the Urantia book, and basically saying, if you can predict a bunch of things in the future, this book is worth reading. And while the Urantia book is purported to be primarily a spiritual text, and although it appears to be totally internally consistent, which was a problem I had with the Bible, inconsistencies and contradictions, I propose that it can be seen as being anticipatory of scientific discoveries not known at the time of writing. And I propose that these assertions or predictions might make a skeptical scientist a little more likely to read the book and discover, uh, looking at the logical consistency of science, how it relates to theology. In part two, we'll talk about some spiritual associations as well. Anyway, as far as methodology, to test this fundamental hypothesis in part one, we examined 31 scientific predictions, and quite frankly, these were Irwin's choices of the science in the Urantia book. So we looked at them in 1987 and compared them with the science in 1987. Um, the predictions cover various scientific disciplines, including biology, physics, astronomy, geology. And we looked at the plausibility of those assertions back then. Irwin has since gone on to the management world, so he couldn't help me with the 2017 update or the current update. But so you have to sort of take my evaluation, but it's open for discussion. Uh, as it says in 101.2.1, the proof of revelation, or proof that revelation, is this fact of human experience. The fact that revelation does synthesize the apparently divergent sciences of nature and the theology of religion into a consistent and logical universe philosophy, a coordinated and unbroken explanation of both science and religion, thus creating a harmony of mind and the satisfaction of spirit, which answers the human experience, those questions of the mortal mind which crave to know how the infinite works out his will and plans in matter, with mind, and on spirit. So we looked at 31 very specific things, and I don't want to go into each one of them because this part two is by far for me the more interesting these days. We looked at healing chemicals, plate tectonics, the source of sun's energy, temperature at the center of the sun, the major energy of space, the creation of the sun, location of seven super universes in the grand universe, creation of the earth and moon, chemical element number 101 and higher, the neutrino particle, mass of a meson, or what we call a mesotron, creation of energy and matter, creation of a solar system, life implanted on Earth 550 million years ago, the end of the Cretaceous age, breakup of the fifth planet, dark islands in the universe, organization of matter in the superuniverse, the use of DNA to evolve human beings, reduced gravity effect on calcium ions, reduced gravity effect on unattached, uncharged electronic energy particles, the origin of sunspot cycle, 12 planets in the solar system, cause of wave action of light, speeds greater than the speed of light, two kinds of gravity, anti-gravity, unknown form of energy, the ultimaton particle, the Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon transition, and the lifespan of an ordinary star. So quite diverse scientific concepts, all predicted in the Urantia book prior to 1934. But looking at the stats in 1987, it looked like 61% of them had already matched with current science, and that, again, looking in 2017, it had risen to 83%, and doing it this year, it's up to 90%. So it's not so important that any one assessment is getting more credible. It's that they collectively are improving. Phil did a very good job of looking at the statistical analysis of getting that right. Well, that's just given a small number of estimates, but to see them actually improving with time actually improves the probability that there was some super human help in these predictions. So, if the plausibility of the scientific assertions that intrigued me to read the entire Urantia book, and by the way, he had me start with paper 42, uh, we then had to say, well, if that was logical, let's apply that same scientific process to the theology of the Urantia book, and sort of to step into that theology. Uh, I wanted to do, how does spirit interact with physics, or how does the law of God relate to the love of God? So let me see. The scientific search to line of the Urantia book were aligning. This naturally leads to a more philosophic question about the complemental nature of science and spirit. And the UB delineates an exquisite balance in everything materially, everything mindily, everything spiritually, from bosons to beatitudes. Everything in the Urantia book is beautifully balanced. The important thing when we're talking about bosons or beatitudes is the scientist, not the science. So if we want to look at the reality of an evolving and advancing universe of energy and matter, we have to look at the scientists. So now in part two, we want to look at plausible associations between human physiology, i.e., what's going on in your atoms and in your body, in your mind, in your brain, and see if there is any possible mechanisms for spiritual influence. So now we look at the scientist, not the science. So, part two, then, the scientific spiritual associations or interassociations that are described in the Urantia book, and we look for science to coordinate those two. So, in part two of this paper, we highlight the increasing believability of the Urantia book as demonstrated by some newly discovered mechanisms of association between human physiology and cosmic coherences. So, we're going to look at how the cosmos influences me personally and you personally. Recent scientific concepts like continuous decoherence coherence mechanisms about a theory called holographic persistence, another theory called the fundamental density theory, and the viscous time theory. These are all very new scientific concepts that pull things together beautifully when related to the Urantia book. So I examined the interplay between electromagnetic energy, philosophical or physiological functions, and holistic or whole cosmic spiritual influences. This study aims to provide a scientific framework to support the hypothesis of an interconnectedness between the physical and spiritual realms. This might give, he said hopefully, a skeptical scientist plausible mechanisms for spirit influence and even suggest the possibility of an afterlife mechanism. How, you know, if you can get a scientist to believe in an afterlife, you got his foot in the door and the rest of the dominoes fall nicely. And hopefully the plausibility for an actual human spiritual interaction might entice a skeptical scientist to discover more of the more meaningful spiritual values, the theology of the Urantia book, what I call theophysics. In fact, it is called theophysics. So, as an introduction, after discovering the increasing plausibility of science in the book, I applied similar investigative techniques to the relationship between physical realities and spiritual probabilities. Science and spirit have long been solely subject to either physical or philosophical debate or theological debate. However, recent advances, I mentioned them, um, speak more to the coherence mechanisms and physiology and offer new insights into how these seemingly disparate energy realms might interact. As it says in 133.5.9, matter and spirit and the state intervening between them are three interrelated and interassociated levels of the true unity of the real universe. So, this paper, supported by the assertions in the Urantia book, explores the hypothesis that the interassociations of energy, ranging from low frequency electromagnetic energy seen as matter to higher frequency energy seen as light to very high frequency cosmic energy. And we can create and sustain more stable and enduring patterns when we can sympathetically harmonize these fairly disparate frequency ranges. But from a top down perspective, there is a continuum between the quantum realm and the realm of classical physics. At some point from top down, more complex forms lose their quantum property in a phenomenon called decoherence. Quantum properties like entanglement disappear, waveform collapses, and matter becomes more measurable, or actually becomes measurable. At that point, classical matter, and this we're talking about the Planck-sized matter, has emerged from this constantly occurring decoherence. This implies that energy matter has an emergent foundation and a coherent destiny. That's our job. And since time relates to motion, it also correlates to the fastest possible motion, i.e., the apparent speed of light. As 133.510 says, when the energies of the universe are slowed down, i.e., lower frequency, that they acquire the requisite degree of motion, then, under favorable conditions, these same energies become mass. So we're talking about that convergence from high frequency to low frequency to mass. In classic theories, energy over time automatically improves its pattern and stability through an involuntary energy transition relieving entropy increasing process, capitalized or described by the second law of thermodynamics, gradually improving the organization of matter. You see it in the history of man and the history of the universe, as if things evolve from fundamental hydrogen to humans in this organization of involuntary energy. Energy does that all by itself. It didn't need any help. Um, Atoms know where to go. That's involuntary. When we get to the human stage, it's a different story. This involves the information encoded in that matter, what's called the second law of information dynamics, or SLID. This is the so-called thermocontextual interpretation of the original QED theories. But there are new theories, the viscous time theory, which is one, which combines these two theories, i.e., the information and the thermodynamic theories, into a single theory. And it suggests that the prime driver in these processes is a coherence gradient rather than a thermal gradient. So instead of saying it's heat drives things, it says that coherence drives things, and the consequence is thermal. I see it's not heat flow, but a coherence tension displacement across a spatial region. So the viscous time heat, uh, the viscous time theory states that what moves is not thermal energy, but a disturbance in a fundamentally coherent field, which acts as the information scaffolding of physical behavior, i.e., heat is the consequence of information divergence. In other words, if it diverges intelligently, it creates heat. There's also another fundamental theory called the fundamental density theory. This simplifies the standard E equals mc squared model equation by moving the m to the other side. So E over m equals c squared. But it posits c squared as the spatial divided by the temporal scales squared. So this sort of brings time and space into the same equation, and it's called the omnium field theory. And this introduces the concept of a universal field whose different configurations give rise to everything we observe. And it says that matter emerges as high density regions, and energy manifests as transitions between those density states. So yet another new theory. And keep in mind, these all support the Urantia Book philosophy, or the way Urantia Book posits information flow and energy flow, is what they call the persistence theory. It also posits instantaneous information sharing as the upholder of this basic scaffolding. And all three of these explanations explain the vagaries of quantum electrodynamics, like entanglement and all the other quantum phenomenon, without invoking a singularity or an infinity, which the current theories require to make things work, or a cosmological constant or something to balance the equation. So in quantum electrodynamics, there are two relevant fields: the electromagnetic field and the field of electrons. Think bosons, electromagnetic, and fermions, field of electrons. At any point in this field influences every other point in that field to varying degrees based on its proximity. So here you've got a field where everything is sensing what everything else is doing in that field. The electromagnetic field is a vector field, meaning it has magnitude and direction. And so every point in space and time has, if it's in the electromagnetic energy field, it has a direction, it knows where it's going, and it has some momentum. It can make something happen. The excitation quantum in the electromagnetic field are photons. So remember that. Photons have a direction and momentum. The other field is the field of electrons, or the electronic field. Now, this one is this is a spinor field, where the vectors for every point in space and time take 720 degrees of rotation. Think a Mobius strip. If you're going on a Mobius strip, you have to go around the strip twice to get back where you started. So automatons going around an electron have to go around twice before they get back to where they started from. This is the spinor field, or the electronic field. So electrons are the quanta in this electron field. Makes sense? So if you think about the fact that they have to go around twice, and oh, by the way, they're spinning in some location, they are bound. They are time bound. Bound in time because they have to go around twice, and bound in space because they are in one location. They don't have a magnitude and a direction, and they're just gone. So think of them as being rotationally, locationally specific. And this is where ubiety comes in. So think immanence, or local. So you've got the electron field has ubiety, it has immanence. Photons, on the other hand, function outside of time. Think ubiquity and transcendence. And as they are absorbed, as photons are absorbed, they are absorbed for a period of time in that 720-degree rotation, and then they spit out another photon. In other words, they're re-radiated by the electrons, but in a different direction. So they have the ability to affect the electron in that they introduce energy into the electron, and they can change the electron's orientation and patterning. So think spiritual influence. So think about light influencing an electron. Think about ubiquity in influencing ubiety, or something outside of time influencing something inside of time. So if, as the Urantia book implies, there are three energies: spiritual, mindal, or moral, and material, then the electron field might be thought of as the material, the mindal as the photonic, and the spiritual as the cosmic whole. And we are looking then for ways which these three rather disparate energies can interact. And that likely only happens at the quantum level. And there may be three similar informationally entangled energy continuums: the material, the moral, and the more complex spiritual. So when we're going to do an experiment on entanglement in the physics world, the first thing we have to do is we have to disentangle everything from the material world. We have to separate the particles that we want to demonstrate entanglement from every other entanglement. This implies an overall entanglement in the material realm. It says, if you can only see entanglement if you separate it from being entangled in everything else, well, obviously it's entangled with everything else. So the persistence theory states that this entanglement is the instantaneous sharing of information about the interconnectedness and mutual interdependence of the wave function of everything else in the wave, as described by viscous time theory Fourier transform. In other words, we're looking at things in the frequency domain and not in the spatial domain. So coherence between particles is not local. It's influenced by everything else in the field. It's topological and mutually sustained by the preservation of this shared information about everything else's location and condition. So when a measurement occurs, we inject energy or entropy at one specific location, and then the structure loses the ability to maintain that current state. And it's not that the signal is exchanged from any one location in the field. It's just that the field now has to adopt a new configuration since it can no longer maintain it materially and temporally in the old configuration. So this very much explains the two-slit experiment, where you measure something, you've injected energy and influenced everything else. This same information, pardon me, because of this sense of relatedness, the shared information gradient, i.e., where is everything else and how strong is it pushing, are related to the energies of this next quasi-stable configuration. It's inject energy, it finds a new stable configuration in this new configuration. The same information gradient entanglement may be true in the Urantia, where photons, which may be light slowed down to behave like matter, so we look like matter, but we're really made of photons, and and interact more cosmically and eternally, because keep in mind photons are eternal, and this also likely persists at the spirit level, where all information relatedness is becoming truly entangled and truly eternally stable. So, the referenced paper, um, it's huge. It's got maybe 100 and anyway, it's got 150 Urantia Book quotes and 188 external research articles, and we look at 41 different physiological mechanisms where the converse of decoherence, coherence, might be taking place in the human body and the human anatomy. So coherence is between the mechanical, the optical, and the electromagnetic realms, which demonstrate emotionally stabilizing and eternally enduring neurological processes were explored in each of these 41 philosophical or physiological mechanisms. This is all based on the sort of fundamental hypothesis that while the Urantia Book is purported to be primarily a spiritual text, I propose that it also offers a scientific mechanism for spiritual, i.e., cosmic or eternal, to interact with the material, temporal, in these associations and interactions. Also, the Urantia Book it specifically states that man can never, quote, discern spiritual reality through the examination of physical causes or effects. I propose that we may be able to discern some of the influences that spiritual reality has on our physiology. Electromagnetic energies might range from the stationary Isle of Paradise, think black hole, with perfect pattern, i.e., stationary matter, or an extremely high vibrational frequency, through optical frequencies, which have volitionally organized vibrational patterns. We'll talk about that a little bit later, all the way down to the low frequency motions of matter with non volitional vibrational energy. So, if we look at a picture of this, we see high frequency, high energy at the paradise, no motion, and motion is related to time. If you can't see something moving, it doesn't have time. It has volition, but not time. Then picture above that the vacuum energy field with its quantum fluctuations, either photonic or um, electron fluctuations. Where we come in is at the top of the blue line here, where the Planck's constant size particles starts to appear, or ultimatonic sized particles start to appear. Then you get down to gamma rays, X rays, ultraviolet, visible, infrared, and then all the way down to radio wave and the basic vibration of the earth at some very low frequency. One continuum we get to play with different tools in each of those continuums. So if this electromagnetic continuum assumption is valid, then I further suggest that to the extent that our low frequency material uh, or electromagnetic energy can be patterned to be sympathetically receptive to the higher frequency, cosmically stable, higher energy frequencies, material energy will harmonize and cohere with those higher cosmic energies and become, in the process, more stable and more enduring. Several mechanisms are employed in this process. We basically um, wanted to test this hypothesis. So we looked at potential spiritual influence mechanisms uh, and analyzed mindal emotional overcontrol of these physiologies and demonstrate coherence mechanisms or ways they might interact with each other, and explored ways to improve the receptivity and capacity for spiritual cosmic influences. And the approach correlates relevant Urantia Book literature as with outside research articles and theoretical models. These are the areas that we looked at, um, and it's a continuously evolving process. My favorite in all these 41 is microtubules and centrosols, which are involved in every cell in our body, and they're called neurotubules when they're in your brain. They're uh, incredibly powerful uh, information processors. So each of these areas were examined for complemental patterns and pattern sharing. Now think about the Urantia Book definition of pattern. It says it's a fundamental blueprint for physical, mental, and spiritual reality, stating that it's the master pattern for which copies are made. So pattern manifests as the organized arrangement of energy that has paid its gravity debt, i.e., it's been slowed down to the point of having mass, making it ready for replication. Ready for replication. Our job is the replication part. From this Urantia Book perspective, personality, mind, and life itself are superimposed upon these basic energy as a distinct pattern. They're not inherent qualities of energy, but the structured forms or copies that energy assumes when it's organized into living, thinking, or spiritual entities. So, patterning is also versatile. It can be complemental across energy regimes. You can have similar patterns that can speak to each other. It can be projected in material, mindal, think optical, or spiritual dimensions, and it may be the medium through which creativity and evolution are expressed. For example, fundamental life patterns generate diverse biological forms over the billions of years, while in the spiritual and intellectual domains, ideas generate ideals and religious concepts. And from these patterns to these and pardon me, religious concepts from these patterns to organize our experiences and pattern matching perception. So it becomes a pattern matching process. Ultimately, the Urantia Book presents pattern as the essential, immutable framework of creation, a unifying principle that underlies the evolution of personality, the organization of the cosmos, and even the manifestation of divine realities coexistent with paradise patterns, those perfect beings. From a physical viewpoint, these patterns have local effects, gradually improving the patterns in evolution over billions of years. Pattern recognition and pattern stabilization involved in that improving process. Be you perfect. It's perfecting the pattern. This is demonstrated personally in genetics and epigenetics, neurological and microtubule pattern development. We're developing patterns in each of those mechanisms. Ralph did a good job of talking about pattern recognition in the Hox genes. Um, it's happening, and everywhere you look, it's pattern recognition. So, as a result of acting in response to previously practiced faith in and reliance on these developing idioms of cognitive neurobiology, we can learn to discriminate by looking in the neurotubule assisted coding vectors, i.e., where are we going, of the eternal axonal pathways resulting in community service and stable civilization. What the heck is an internal axonal pathway? It's a bundle of axons or nerve fibers, which actually include neurotubules or microtubules, depending whether they're in the brain or the body. And each of these microtubules have qubit computational capability at the optical, mechanical, radio wave, and heat ranges. And they connect remote parts of the brain and the spinal cord, facilitating communication and coordination and coordinating the various physiological functions in the body and brain. So, cross pollination of patterns between these salient neural populations improve their interrelatedness, their Christ likeness, and their similarities, think godlikeness. This whole thing can be broken down. It's called transcendental naturalism, and it can be broken down like this: energy matter is a continuum between the quantum realm and the realm of classical physics. When more complex forms lose their coherence, matter emerges from the quantum realm via this decoherence mechanism. And since it's reversible, transformational, and energy can change form but doesn't disappear, it has a coherent destiny as well. We are also functioning with life, or what I call sentient autopoiesis. There is a circular pattern when something maintains itself by regulating its own composition and conserving its own boundaries in a system of feedback loops. The human body, brain, and emotions all demonstrate the necessary feedback loops of autopoiesis. Autopoiesis is self creation. Mind. There are mechanisms involving things like microtubules and numerous other communication mechanisms in the human body that form the basis of a 4E, or what's called an embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended cognitive feedback loop. As we enhance the positive aspects of these feedback loops, we improve our spiritual or cosmic receptivity. We're being influenced by the cosmic. As we improve the strength of these feedback loops, we strengthen the energy pattern on any of these cosmic energy transformations. And we make our patterns more stable, enduring, and more eternal. Microtubules and neurotubules emit ultraviolet light that reflect all these enduring chain patterns. I look just like me in the ultraviolet in two very specific ultraviolet frequencies. Culture. As concepts evolved, righteous minds tend to ground morality in six innate cross-cultural moral feedback loops: care harm, fairness cheating, loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, sanctity degradation, and liberty and oppression. A moral culture, it then, is determined by the point in that each of these dimensions where actions become immoral. In other words, a moral system is defined by the weights we give it across and within the dimensions of different behaviors or expressions. So, as a culture, it evolves towards light and life when more sophisticated models emerge or patterns emerge, culminating in wisdom, which grows out of the wisdom of the individual as guided by this top down cosmic pattern matching insight. So there's not necessarily a direct connection between how we think things are. We often mistake our self reporting unless we invoke this reversible top down closed loop coherence decoherence perspective. And as a final thought, findings suggest that mind, as distinct from brain, where brain is the hardware or the energy manifestations of all phases and forms of phenomenal motion, and where the mind is the dynamic or software patterning of the flow of electrons in the brain and body, sort of a pre-gravity force, think ubiquitous interactions with the electron field. And the mind is seen as a mitigating force between energy matter and the potential spirit patterning of that matter. As the Urantia book says, mind can be superimposed upon energy, but consciousness is not inherent in the purely material level. The integration of physical forces and energies with spiritual powers is shown to be mediated by mind. Additionally, the concept of pattern as the fundamental blueprint of physical, mental, and spiritual reality is explored, highlighting its role in organizing energy.
Thanks so much. It says in the book that because we are so electrochemical in our nature, that this is somewhat of a hindrance to our adjuster in dealing with us. If you had to pick one thing that you think would be the most beneficial to the individual to overcome this sort of thing. I personally have a bias for prayer, but that's my bias. So I'd like to see if you have a bias. So,
Well, my bias would not be prayer because I have a problem with prayer. But my bias would be, or my suggestion would be, apply love as required. If God is love, then if we want to be more godlike, we have to apply love as required. Um, when the Urantia book talks about love, it talks about the difference between our love and divine love. Essentially, it's hard for us to love the unlovable, to love the murderer or the convict. Divine love goes where love is needed most. That's the kind of transition we need to think. We are in a self-serving mode. We need to be in a other serving mode. It's a 180-degree shift in the material thinking. So when we are functioning at the bottom of the rung here, we need to think like we are not. Think like we are top down, thinking from the top down as opposed to thinking from the bottom up. What do I do to protect me? No, what do I do to serve others?
okay, great, great. All right, so let's kick off the discussion. Would somebody like to start? Okay, Brad, take it away.
A lot of that was very humbling for me. I thought I was a scientist at one point. Now that's some very advanced. I see you're trying to seek a really high level of unification of some very diverse concepts, and I thought I might could we just pull on one of them a little bit? That payment of gravity debt. Can you describe what that means to you in your framework? That has just always baffled me. What an anthropomorphization of gravity.
Yeah, yeah. Um, the way I see it is there's extremely high energy at paradise or extreme high frequency. And as you slow it down, you have to put energy in to slow it down. You got or do something with that high energy, and that's the gravity debt.
Hmm.
So I see it, you think cosmic rays are very high frequency, X-rays are lower, visible light is lower, mechanical energy is much lower. Um, so paying the gravity debt is just slowing energy down to where we can deal with it,
Hmm.
in my opinion.
And it's a debt in the sense that, I mean, like in financial terms, we accumulate debt when we've expended something, but we haven't paid for it. I mean, does the analogy hold? Like, what is it that's been expended or paid for that has to be accounted for debt-wise?
You're putting energy in to slow it down, I think. So you're
Okay.
paying energy debt to get it to behave like matter. You're getting
Oh, okay.
paradise energy to behave like matter. You're hoping on the investment. You've paid the debt, you've invested energy in this material thing. Hopefully, it will come back to you. The energy is eternal. It just now has to be patterned by us and returned as eternally stable patterns as opposed to unstable energy manifestation. So.
Yeah, thanks. I like that. Thank you. Very clear.
You're welcome.
Okay, David.
Hey. Yeah, while you were talking, I was thinking about automatons and like three different scenarios. Um, One is the Morancha progression, where they say for every new body we have to be kind of like retuned for
Yeah.
the automatons will spin slower, if I'm not mistaken. The other one was the body soul connection. Um, are we have souls? We're developing souls. Is that connected to our physical bodies? Like, and why I think that was that when Jesus died, his body was put in the tomb, and there was 36 hours that passed, and then he rose not from wherever he was, because his personality is kind of recorded as being active at some point, but he returned to this tomb to rise in a different form, in a Morancha form. So that's why I think there might be a connection between our physical bodies and the one we rise into Moranchally. And what was the other one? Midwayers. Midwayers, secondary midwayers can go through a rock or break into a jail or whatever it is that they want to do, because they can manipulate physically the matter. They're experts at that. And so this is like a volitional thing. Are they changing their automatons by volition so that they can go through the tomb, through that rock, and then to actually push that rock away?
Okay, so that's basically four questions. I'll address them one at a time, but I think the first two are kind of related. The way
Yeah.
I see it is we are material, but we have a feature in our anatomy that is light-based. There are microtubules in every cell of your body and millions of them in every neuron on your brain. They're called neurotubules in the brain. They're marvelous little things. They're 13 columns of dimers. They have four fundamental frequencies: vibrational, mechanical vibration, radio wave vibration, heat or infrared vibration, and two very specific ultraviolet frequencies. So if photonic energy is eternal, and we have parts of our anatomy which represent my entire body and my brain, the way I think, the way I'm structured, those two frequencies alone would define me. Can I share screen from here, Brad? Yeah, I can. Sure. All right. I'm going to share a picture of me in two very specific ultraviolet frequencies that come from the microtubules in my anatomy. I look just like me. So I suspect that's how I will end up looking, or perhaps the best version of me, uh, perhaps a younger version. Hopefully, they took a snapshot earlier in life because I'm looking pretty tired there. But anyway, so essentially, you have a function of your anatomy that is keeping track of all of your thoughts and your physical behavior to begin over there, right where you leave off down here in the photonic world. We can currently universities all over the world can make light slow down light and make it behave like a molecule. Well, if we can do it here on Earth, those energy controllers can sure as heck do it for a artificially maintained Morancha state. So if you think of us as the soul us as looking like that ultraviolet image in the first pass, it's made of photons, but it just looks like us. Uh, at each of the 570 stages of modification, we probably get introduced into this photonic world, a little spiritual frequency. If you think about the number of molecules being exactly twice the number of material matter, all that is that the photons are easier to squash into the same size packages as the matter is currently squashed into. In other words, if you take a hydrogen atom and make photons behave like a hydrogen atom, you can make them twice as dense. So you could essentially have a 2D or a twice dense hydrogen atom. So you can make up a material body out of photons, which would have twice as many material equivalents in the photon electromagnetic spectrum. So here you are, all made of light. Your second question, the soul. So my personal opinion is that is your soul. The bioluminescence of you is essentially eternal, because photons are eternal. So the pattern of the photons of you is already eternal. So that's potentially an image of you that looks just like me as my soul. You have your soul based on the optics of your microtubules. Your third question was about Jesus. He went through multiple stages. So he probably was in the ultraviolet, these two ultraviolet frequencies in the first manifestation. And you can understand why Mary Magdalene would say, what is that? It's all purple looking thing. So, but I don't think we can base all of our evolution on Michael's evolution. He probably had some exceptions to his rules. The other question was about midwayers. And keep in mind that if midwayers are midway between material and morontial, or material and spiritual, they probably function in that light photon world. They last forever. They don't die. So they're probably in that eternal photon energy. Well, why are there primary and secondary midwayers? If you think about photonic energy, certain frequencies can move matter, other frequencies can't. So, ultraviolet light from the sun burns the top of the skin but doesn't go anywhere down. Heat, lower frequency energy, can go right through you. So, it depends on what frequency range the midwayers are as to what capability they have. I think you have to have secondary midwayers in order to move matter. Primary midwayers can't do that. That's probably because they're operating in a different optical frequency range. But if you want to move, have you ever seen a solar radiometer, the little black and white thing that whirligigs around? Well, it's because there's energy in the photons. It heats the dark side and reflects off the light side. So the heat makes the radiometer spin. That same kind of influence we can feel when we sense their spiritual influence. So I think that's where we have to learn to sense their influences. We have to think at the molecular level, not at the thought level.
But I always thought of photons as being in motion, but you're saying that they can be stationary as well.
No, photons are definitely in motion. They're always going. They're always outside of time. When they're absorbed by an electron, they go around the electron a couple of times and then spit out in some other direction. When you look in the mirror, the photons are different photons coming back at you that went to the mirror in the first place. They bounced, ricocheted around off the silver atoms in the mirror and came back. So it's an absorption, re-radiation, not a pure reflection of a single photon. So they're always moving. So they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere and always moving and always subject to mother's patterns. So we're material, we're stationary. We have to be able to sense that solar wind somehow. And we do talk about different mechanisms because there's different mechanisms for each of the coherences. So we're talking about different things in terms of how do we sense time? What makes us time conscious versus what makes a magnetic resonance image work? Why is the nucleus of the atom aware of paradise? Each one has a different sensing mechanism, and it uses a different frequency to do that sensing.
Thank you, Geoff.
Okay.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, let's go to Tom, and then we've got some questions from the audience.
Hey, thanks, Geoff. I really, really got a lot out of this. I really like the way your discussion too decided to focus on the scientist. And what you've done, it seems to me, is you have drawn a really an interesting depiction of what composes a scientist. And I love the way you put it, the hardware, the brain is the hardware, and the mind is the software. And I thought, well, that's kind of mechanical in a way, but it really kind of describes what it's made up of. But the scientist itself, if you look at what's in the Urantia book, if you want to look at the scientist, we would have no science if there weren't for scientists. And we are all here in this group as scientists. So, but the scientists, and you'll all relate to this, we are all curious, thinking, choosing, creative, combining, and discriminating. And that's what we do. Now, the only question I have is on your discussion is when you go through this, I don't see the word personality or the word life. So how would you incorporate personality and life in this wonderful hardware and software and spirit?
Well, fundamentally, I may have misled you if I said that mind is something tangible. Mind is patterning of brain. And what is patterning? Well, patterning is, the constant flow or changing of information sharing. We talked about those different fundamental new theories where everything senses everything else. Interesting thing about microtubules and these photons that they're emitting, they talk to all neighboring neurotubules. So they're constantly aware of every other neurotubule in the brain, just like the body is aware more on a slower timeline than the brain. The brain is sort of almost very quickly aware of all the influence of all the other microtubules in the brain or neurotubules in the brain. So it's sort of building up voltages, kind of getting the pattern, and then it discharges and changes the pattern. So it's more that the scientist is the hardware, in other words, the neurons, but the mind is the patterning of the flow of energy in those neurons. So what makes them real? What makes personality real? Well, personality is being able to sense cosmic influences. Are you open to moral influence? Bingo, you got a thought adjuster. Didn't mean you made the right choice when you were 5, but you were open to making that moral decision. What does that mean? It means that you had the neurons in place, sensed which way would be the preferred way to go, were subject to the cosmic influence and went this way. And I think that's the way the thought adjuster works. He's trying to influence you to be more cosmic, to be more loving, to be more like God. And we are 180 degrees opposed to that. Self-preservation, survival of the fittest, competition, absolutely. We can kill that guy, no problem at all. We got to turn that all the way around before they can even start to have an influence. If you're running away from the light, you're not going to see the light. You got to be running towards the light in order to see the light and be guided by that light. So, yeah, I think our job is to sense the patterns and respond from that top-down loving perspective.
Sure. And where does consciousness reside in this model?
I think consciousness is your awareness of spiritual influence or awareness of other influences. So if you're unconscious under anesthetic or some other drugged out state, you're not conscious of anything. You've given up your consciousness. So what is consciousness? Consciousness is an awareness of something else. God consciousness would be a consciousness of God. Interpersonal consciousness is I'm conscious of you seem a little stressed, or that kind of interpersonal consciousness. So I think it's just an awareness, and that awareness is a function of your sensory input. And we talk about in this course, we talk about all the different senses and their influences on your emotional self-mastery and how to influence the neurotransmitters that are positioned at all the synapses in the brain to affect a better response to those sensory inputs. It's a very complex, all interrelated mechanism we are dealing with. Fascinating but complex.
Phil, I'll get to you in a minute, but I need to ask a few questions from the audience. I'm going to combine two different questioners. One is from Halbert, which is, why do you use the word photon, which is not used by the revelators, but which was used starting back in the 1920s? And I'll pair that along with the question from Rick Warren, which is, does the UB text support the scientific assertion that photons are composed of subatomic particles, i.e. bosons?
When you use the term particle, it's a ripple in a field that we measure as a particle. It's not really a particle. So a photon isn't really a particle, but we measure it as a particle. So it's a ripple in the electromagnetic spectrum. And to answer Halbert, you're right. I interpret photons as the electromagnetic continuum that the Urantia book speaks about. That's my interpretation of the electromagnetic continuum. And electromagnetic energy, photons are very common in the scientific community. So you have to speak about photons if you're going to talk about energy to a scientist. So I guess I'm really more speaking to the scientist in that terminology.
Okay, and your comment, your personal comment about prayer has intrigued a number of people. We've got like four people that have asked about why do you find prayer personally a challenge?
I find prayer personally a challenge because when I think of prayer, I think of praying for something. And for me to say that I know what you should be doing better than you do is silly. Now, prayer of thanksgiving, absolutely. Prayer of worship, adoration, absolutely. But praying for some specific outcome or for them to do something based on my limited understanding, to me is a little sketchy because I don't know what they know. So I'll trust them.
Okay.
The limitation is on me, not them. So
right. So I think that answered the question. As far as like Thanksgiving and worship, you're totally there.
absolutely.
So I understand. Okay, Phil, you're up.
All right, thank you. Well, I would say I pray for help in becoming, more aware of the will of God. So, I think they say the result of prayer is more your change than God's change. But if you pray and you change yourself, then maybe God can do something different than God could do before you changed yourself.
I presume they're helping me as much as they possibly can to begin with. So I don't need to say, hey, up your ante. I'm not getting enough help here.
Oh, well, no, I'm usually, the fact that I'm praying is going to help me change myself. It's my attitude that needs to change. But anyway, let me ask my question. The Urantia book says that material things must be experienced before they can be loved. Spiritual things have to be loved before they can be experienced. So how would you fit that into your cosmology and other vibrations that you've been talking about?
That's a very good one. If you think of love as a frequency, as a pattern of something, in order for us to see it, we have to be able to recognize that pattern. So if to recognize a celestial, a loving celestial, we have to be more loving. We have to recognize that love. Um, they can see the need for love without me being loving. So we have to be known to be loved so they can see, oh, yes, that person needs to be loved. I'm loveless. They can still love me. In order for me to see them, I have to be able to see love. Well, how do you see love? Well, how do you feel, something? You have to have a sensor that's tuned to that something. So I think if you can feel what love would be like, you can begin to see what love would look like. In other words, a reciprocity of pattern recognition. If you got a wave going, right? If it's a high frequency wave, you can't see it. If it's a low frequency wave, you can't see it. It has to be in the visual range in order to see it. So if that frequency range is something you want to be able to see, you have to be able to tune your receiver to that frequency range. How do you tune a receiver to see love? You have to have a more loving receiver. You have to be in tune with that concept of love in order to see love.
Well, as I see it, I guess I'm thinking that spiritual things have to be loved from the heart. Material things have to be loved from the mind. So it's two approaches to it. Spiritual things you have to love, and then you can experience. Material things, you intellectually learn about them, and then you can have you can love them from the heart. So I don't know. I think I guess I'm thinking there are two different faculties there that, and one is the heart, spiritual side of us, and the other is the intellect, the material side, more of the material side of us. And we have to be able to use both of them. And when we learn something material, then we can appreciate it. But when we feel that something is the right, the good, the beautiful, we do that somehow without the intellectual until later.
Yeah, no, I like that differentiation. Higher mind, cosmic consciousness allows you to see things lovable or see things that are lovable, as opposed to feeling materially things that you love.
Chuck Thurston made this observation and asked, do you think these two statements might be related? From 44.5 3.2, energy mind manipulators. These are the experts of intercommunication between Urantia and other types of intelligent beings. This form of communication between mortals is practically non-existent on Urantia. And the other statement is from paper 29, section 4, paragraph 14. The physical controllers are chiefly occupied in the adjustment of basic energies undiscovered on Urantia. These unknown energies are very essential to the interplanetary system of transport and to certain techniques of communication. I guess few of us have experienced, or none of us have experienced either one of those, but I think he's trying to see if those could be related to some of the things that you're talking about.
Absolutely. Mind energy manipulators, I can see how that can work more efficiently on the mansion world where you're all photonic energy, similar matched frequency in terms of mind manipulation. When we're in the material state, I think it's a little more challenging. They do say that Adam and Eve could communicate over distances, so there was some ability to communicate there. We are all sensitive to all the energies around us, but the orders of magnitude sensitivity is so low on some of those interactions. But we're all operating in a field that speaks to his second question, which was, um, the unknown energy. Likely that is the vacuum energy field. So think of just under the quantum energy is a field, the vacuum energy field. And and you can push information around on that energy field, pop one out here and, somewhere comes out. So manipulations of the vacuum energy field, once you're out a higher frequency than photons, allows you to communicate. That's probably how the gravity messengers do it in the vacuum energy, which could relate to the gravity because that's what the gravity price debt you have to pay. You have to get through that vacuum energy field in order to get out into the visible world, the visible lower frequency world. So it could be, but there may be other mechanisms of interpersonal communication. But the amplitude of the frequencies are so low, we're going to need some serious amplification equipment to be able to do anything like that.
Okay, George, take it away.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how you think spirit, mind, and matter interact, by which I mean, in paper 12, they tell us that they can actually measure physical gravity, mind gravity, and spirit gravity as they register on paradise, in the infinite spirit, and in the eternal sun. So these are three separate and distinct realms of energy. In other words, the nether paradise does not attract spiritual energy, and the eternal sun does not attract material energy. They're different realms of energy. So if we have spirit, mind, and matter combined in a human being, materialists always have argued that you can't have only something material can cause a material effect. Whereas as I read the Urantia book, if I have an idea, I can create a material effect in my body. So the argument they always make is you can't have an immaterial thing cause a material effect. But from what you're saying, I'm wondering, this coherence mechanism, could that be related to harmonic resonance between different domains of energy, like between the physical and the intellectual or mindal? In other words,
Absolutely.
harmonic resonance might be a way of transferring energy from one energy domain to another.
Absolutely. And that's the fascinating feature of these microtubules. They are a frequency up step, down step mechanism. They vibrate these little tubes, saltwater internal core, bioluminescent dimers that flash electrical pulses with bioluminescence down the tube, sending information down the tube between cells or between end to end in the nerves. Each one of those microtubules has the ability to vibrate mechanically in sync with a radio wave frequency, or in harmonic, because that's close. And the radio wave can go sync with the infrared, and the infrared can sync with the ultraviolet. So here you've got a step up, step down mechanism that goes all the way from the ultraviolet down to the mechanical. That's our magic. Every cell in our body has those intercommunicators. In the gut, in the body, it's used to communicate between our senses, our hunger, our thirst, our gut sense. And in the brain, it's for these thinking, those electrical charges, those bioluminescent information passages. Our thoughts are transitioning our thoughts or making things ready for a thought. So yeah, and keep in mind, all microtubules are aware of all the other microtubules and what their relative excited state is, and they can talk to each other across a distance because they have this light uh, communication mechanism. So yeah, it's all about coherence. Coherence in our mind or in our brain and mind with cosmic influences. So when they match, now we are receptive to thinking. The more we think God-like, the more we apply love as required, the more we are responding to their influence.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Phil, yes.
Very quickly, I guess what I heard was that when Adam and Eve were not disrupted, they could communicate several miles away, but then maybe their microtubules got disrupted and they no longer could had that capacity. Is that accurate in your way of thinking?
No, they dropped back to human microtubule capacity. Keep in mind, Adam and Eve glowed with an ultraviolet hue, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Because the more microtubules you have in your body, the more you would glow ultraviolet. So they probably just dropped back to shorter microtubules and picked up thought adjusters as the consolation prize for that. I think you can relate microtubule length to the adjutants. At certain microtubule length, you got courage. At certain, you got knowledge. At certain, you got counsel. So they've got these mechanisms that they can work with at each of the adjutant stages. And when you get to worship and wisdom, now they're long enough to be doing their own thinking. They're doing their own energy management or soul development, essentially.
Okay, well, Don Hess was thinking somewhat along the same line as Phil, and he was asking, do you think that the purity of the thought processes of Adam and Eve made them bioluminescent to the extent that it could be seen beyond their bodies by humans?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the longer microtubules or the stronger microtubules, the more you would glow in the ultraviolet. So I think that accounts for that. There are other mechanisms involved with the atoms. We can actually see in the ultraviolet, but this fluid in the eyes has evolved to protect us from ultraviolet rays. So, but we still have the ability to see ultraviolet.
Okay, I've got another really good question here. Belen Sadio asked, what is the wolf is physical and the warp is morontial? She would like an explanation of that in terms of your discussion.
Yeah, that's a very good question. My personal opinion, of course, we don't know, we'll find out when we get there. My personal opinion is that it's all photons, but it's photons in our first modification, our first body. It's photons that look like us. Now, the warp and the woof means it's made of photons, but it looks like matter. So it's sort of photons that behave like matter. So that it's not a physical weave where you got one thread this and one, but you've basically got photons that are behaving, and it takes extra energy to make them behave like matter. So this is an artificially maintained state. And then each time we transition through the 570, we get more of the spirit influence. So we become less material looking, and we pick up a few extra abilities at the higher and higher frequencies as we go through each of the stages. So we learn how to handle low frequency photon energy, then we get the higher and higher frequency photon energy as we step up in octaves. In my opinion, it's all supposition at this stage, but if it fits logically and it works,
Right. We'll eventually get the answer, right?
hopefully.
So yeah, hopefully we'll get the answer.